Today we're going to be talking about wounded healers. That as pastors, as leaders, we actually become wounded healers. This phrase was first spoken by a priest who has now gone to be with the Lord. His name is Henry Nouwen. He was Dutch. He has written many books, but this book, Wounded Healers, has had a profound impact on me. So for the first part of this class, the structure of it, I attribute to him. God has used him in the lives of many Christians through his books. I just want to make one quote from his book, Wounded Healer. Real martyrdom means a witness that starts with the willingness to cry with those who cry, laugh with those who laugh, and to make one's own painful and joyful experiences available as sources of clarification and understanding. He's saying that's real martyrdom. That's really giving your life for others. The willingness to do that, to cry with those who cry, laugh and rejoice with those who rejoice, and to let other people see into your life the things that have been painful, the things that have been worthy of rejoicing. And sharing your life with people like that is a form of sacrifice. It takes the work of the Holy Spirit in us to transform us to be leaders like that. So as we talk about being wounded healers, what are the wounds that we're talking about? Well, God deals with wounds in His Word, and so therefore so do we. Scripture tells us that God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Isaiah 61:1 tells us to bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted, and it's talking about Jesus. That's what He did in His ministry. So as we seek to reach out in evangelism and mission, we're to bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted. Well, what are the wounds? I think there's at least 4 categories of the wounded that we'll discuss. The first is the wounded world, and there's many words to describe the wounds in the world. Dislocated, lost, we hear that word a lot, don't we, about the world. Searching, and fearful. Doug's been talking about guilt, shame, and fear. Fear is a big wound in the world, but so is being lost, being guilty, sensing shame, searching for an answer, searching for healing, and being dislocated, as if we don't belong here. Human beings all over the world feel dislocated. They're not sure why they exist. They're not sure what direction to go. They feel out of place. That's a wound. So we're going to look up some scriptures, and I'd like to ask for your help. Palekalo, will you look up Isaiah chapter 59, verses 4 through 9? And Doug, will you look up Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 26?
Sure.
Martinette, will you look for Ephesians chapter 2, verses 12 to 14, Paul's letter to the Ephesians chapter 2, verses 12 to 14. And Percy, will you look up Romans, please? Romans 1, verses 18 to 22. we'll read these and just discover some of the wounds of the world that are common to people everywhere in the world.
Okay.
So you have Isaiah 59,
Yes.
verses 4 through 9. If you could read that for us.
Okay. I'm reading Isaiah 59. That is verse 49 in the Bible.
Brother, may I request, just because of my hearing, that you
Okay.
read it much louder for me?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
None calleth for justice, nor any pleadeth for truth. They trust in vanity and speak lies. They convince themselves and bring forth iniquity. They hath they have cut eggs and weave the spinner's webs. He that eateth of their eggs dieth, and that which is crushed breaketh out into a viper. Their webs shall not become garments, neither shall they cover themselves with their works. Their works are works of iniquity, and the acts of violence is in their hands. Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity, wasting and destruction are in their path. The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. They have made them crooked paths. Whosoever goeth therein shall not know peace. Therefore is judgment far from us, neither doth justice overtake us. We wait for light, but behold, absolutely for brightness, but we walk in darkness.
All right. So what are some of the words in that passage that you heard that indicate wounds of the world? It said at the beginning there was no justice and no truth. There's lies. Do lies and the absence of truth, does that cause wounds? It does. What else? What else did you hear in that passage?
It talks about conceiving trouble like giving birth, meaning intentionally seeking to make trouble, to cause evil. There's an intentionality there.
Okay. So when people do evil to one another, that causes wounds, doesn't it? When people come up with in their minds creative ways of doing evil, that wounds someone, and it probably wounds them as well.
Oh, yeah.
What else?
Also, the issue of shedding innocent blood.
Yes.
So where the blood is shed, meaning there is a wound.
Yes, there is. Shedding innocent blood indicates a wound, and it talks about violence, doesn't it? It talks about crooked roads, crooked paths, that people find a way to go the wrong way instead of a straight path, which would indicate goodness, their iniquities cause them to make crooked paths. And then it says there's an absence of light. So we're walking around in what?
Darkness, yeah.
Isolation also.
Disorientation,
Yes.
darkness,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, yep.
That's a lot of wounds just in that one passage in Isaiah. And really, wouldn't you say it's all present today? All those things that Isaiah was talking about in their land many hundreds of years ago, it's that way today. We have all those things to deal with. Okay, how about Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 26?
Okay, this is a prophetic word
Okay.
that includes a lot of wounds. So it says 77s are decreed for your people in your holy city to finish transgressions, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this: from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed.
Wow. So in the world, do we see war today?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes,
Yep.
there's
All
war
over the world, right?
Yep.
all over the
In
world.
every time. It mentions at the end desolation, sin, transgression, and death. Those are things that people all over the world deal with
Yes.
on a regular basis. Okay, let's go on to the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 12 to 14.
It reads, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope, without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away, we were once far away, have been brought near through the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and has destroyed the barrier, the divine wall of hostility. Thank you.
So do we have dividing walls of hostility today in the world?
Sure.
Are
Yes,
there
yes.
divisions?
Yes, the divisions.
There's hostility, right? Without Christ, anywhere that Christ is not actively present in the lives of people, people are without hope and without God. That's what Paul was saying to the Ephesians. And in their time it was true. In our time, that's very true.
But one of the things that's happening in America now is intentional walls, intentional divisions being set up, and the hostility that's coming out of that is getting ugly. You know, we've always been known as a country without tribalism, and now we're becoming quite tribal in that regard. You know, who do you stand with? What's your group? How do you see things? And I've noticed that when he says that the dividing wall of hostility, it leads to hostility when we do that with each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's lots of wounds there. And that division is not the way God meant the world to be, right?
Right.
In the garden, there was no division until sin entered the world. There was no separation from God, and there was no separation between Adam and Eve. But then we see when sin entered the world, they're blaming each other.
Yes.
It's the woman you gave me.
Yes.
It's the serpent. It's you, God, who did this to us. So those divisions come in and they cause a lot of pain, a lot of wounds. Okay, Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 22.
The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools.
Okay. Where do you hear wounds there? Woundedness in the world.
Foolish hearts. The foolish hearts.
Foolish hearts
Yes.
that are darkened, that don't have any clarity, don't have understanding. You think there's a lot of foolishness in our world today?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lot of darkened minds where people don't understand what's going on? A lot of confusion.
Yes.
And at the beginning of that passage, Paul talked about wickedness.
Yes.
We don't always discuss wickedness
Yeah.
because it's intentional evil, right? It's what that first passage talked about, the creative, using our creative minds to come up with something to harm someone.
Yes.
That's wickedness. When you hear that a child has been abused,
Yeah.
when you hear that someone has started a coven of witches, this happens even in the U.S. There's places in our country where witches are very strong, and they form covens, and they worship Satan, and they're trying to get power in different areas of their life. You see it here with witch doctors. The wickedness that is done to people by others is amazing.
Yeah.
And if you think about the wars that we've had and the destruction that one group of people has done to another, in every age, it's amazing that we still exist in some ways. But all those things cause such deep wounds. People that have been prisoners of war or who've been through trauma, their woundedness is so deep that it can take a long time for the healing to come. The wounds of the world, things like starvation. I mean, we have those things with us, don't we? Even right around
Yes.
where we live, we see starvation. Things like flooding, things like, what we call natural disasters, when there's a tsunami and it wipes out a whole village, a mudslide that comes down into a mountainous country and it wipes out whole groups of people. So there are wounds in the world that are caused by us as people. There are wounds that just come from living in a broken world, living on a broken planet. And so the wounds are very deep. Sometimes we don't talk about all of them because we feel so helpless. But God is not helpless. God can heal wounds no matter how deep they go. And no matter how many people are affected. We know that God is capable of taking care of everyone in the world, everyone who's ever lived. He knows how many hairs are on our heads. He knows what we need. He knows the wounds. And Scripture tells us that there isn't anything that people experience on earth as far as wounds that Jesus didn't experience in some way. So he experienced the results of wickedness. He experienced the results of betrayal, disappointment, hopelessness. He sweated blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was under so much pressure. So the wounds of the world. Well, keep those in mind as we go on to the second category, and that's the wounded generation. When I say the wounded generation, what generation do you think of? What do you think we mean by the wounded generation?
Were you talking about young people?
Yes, I'm talking about young people. Think about the years between, say, 18 and 30. Do you think that young people have special wounds at that age? I think they do. I think they do. Let's look up some scriptures that describe the younger generation that has special wounds. Isaiah 53:6. Who will look up Isaiah 53:6?
Isaiah 53:6
Isaiah.
reads as follows: "Oh, we are like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquities of us all."
Yes. So there, it's talking about the Messiah, that all of our sin, all of our iniquities will be laid on him. But think about people at that age, say 18 to early 30s. That's a time when many of us turn away from God. Even if we've heard about Jesus in our lives, even if we've had a family that went to church maybe, many people, once they hit 18 or 19 years old, they're going out on their own more. They often will rebel and turn away from God. So turning to their own way sounds very familiar to me for younger people, because they say, what? We don't want people to tell us what to do. We want to make our own way. And God says that causes wounds. That turning away from him, wanting to go our own way, it happens so often with young people. And so they're confused. They get self-absorbed. They want to go their own way. So then let's look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 4. Matthew chapter 16, verse 4.
I've got that if you like.
Okay. Go
This
ahead.
is Jesus talking. He says, "A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Jesus then left them and went away.
Okay. So when Jesus said the sign of Jonah, we think probably he was talking about that being buried and then coming back to life, right? The sign of Jesus to our generation would be his dying on the cross and his resurrection. But here he says, a wicked and adulterous generation. Young people are trying to find their own way, and they often, in doing that, will turn to wickedness. They're rebelling. They're at a time when they're trying to make their own way as adults, and they often will turn to wickedness. It's intriguing. It's attractive. when you're that age, you don't really necessarily think way ahead to the end of your life what result this will have. You're looking for something, you're looking for excitement. And adulterous generation, well, many of us, that was a time in our life, and is a time for young people, where they're not paying attention to the rules that their parents laid down or their grandparents laid down. And so adultery or fornication or just any kind of sexual activity outside of the marriage covenant that God designed that for, that's a very strong, powerful desire in us to satisfy our sexuality, but to do it within the bounds that God has laid down so that there's joy and freedom and not destruction. We see many young people going into relationship after relationship and then being broken by that. And so the generation, each age has had people in this younger generation that have suffered because they have not gone and used their desires in a positive way, in the way that God intended. And so later, when they marry, they have struggles. They have things they wish they could forget. They would like to be there for their spouse fully, and yet they have memories now. They've hurt themselves by engaging in, what would have been called free love or do whatever feels good. So that's part of the woundedness of this age group. And then Ephesians.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
This interesting to me about looking for a sign. This generation looks for a sign. It's like in the midst of all that you just described, they're sort of like, prove to me, God, that you exist. Prove to me that I should follow you. In other words, they're not taking responsibility for their own life. They're demanding a sign, some sort
And
of...
they're not going to take anybody's word for
No.
it that's gone before them.
Right.
They have to experience it themselves.
That's right.
All right, and then let's look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 18 to 19. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 18 to 19.
18 ways. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the light of God because of the ignorance that is in their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lusting for more. For more, yes, thank you.
Okay, so they're darkened in their understanding. Do you think a lot of our young people are darkened in their understanding?
Yep.
They're getting mixed messages. The government, the schools sometimes are telling them things that are not godly. They're telling them, pursue whatever's good for you. Don't worry about hurting other people. Be whoever you want to be. Choose your gender. Decide if you want to be male or female. So they're getting this information that is darkening their understanding. And they're separated from God. They're living very lonely lives. We've seen a rise in this age group of suicide, and most of the time when it's looked into, you find that people say, oh, they were so lonely.
Yep.
They didn't feel a part of any group. They didn't feel accepted. They were so lonely. You look into the letters or the writings, the emails, the texts that people in this age group are writing, and when they share their hearts, they're so isolated. They're so lonely. They may have many friends on Facebook, but they don't have true friendships. They're not living life with people in a way that is nourishing to them. So they're living these lives that are fake online. You can be whoever you want to be when you're online, but you know in your heart that's not who you really are. So how are you going to feel accepted when all of your friends are virtual?
Yes.
They're all out there. And we see this even with COVID. We've seen a rise in suicide among young people. They have so many wounds, but one of the biggest is loneliness, that being separated from God and from other people. And it said right there, their hearts become hard. Their hearts are hardened. When you tell your conscience over and over, I don't care what you say, when you go against what God has put inside you to help you navigate through the river of life, what's right and what's wrong, you have nothing to go on.
Yep.
Everyone is telling you a different story about what's right, what's wrong. You harden your heart. You do it to survive. You get hard. And that's what's happened to a lot of our young people. Let's look at the last one for the wounded generation. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 20.
2
Corinthians.
12, verse 20 reads as follows. For I fear lest when I come I shall not find you such as I would, and that I shall not found unto you such as ye would not, lest there be debits in everything, wrath, strife, backbiting, whispering, swellings, and tumults.
Okay, so discord, right? Rage, wrath, selfish pride, tumult, disorder. That's what characterizes a group of people who are not, they don't have roots. They don't have something to cling to help them grow and be healthy. And so we see that in our young people sometimes. I'm not saying in all of our young people. Some of our young people are very strong in the faith. Jesus has captured them and they are following Christ. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about young people who are not connected to Christ. They don't have a root system. So they give in to selfish pride, to disorder. So we would say the wounded generation, some of their wounds would be rootlessness, being self-absorbed, being confused, being lonely. These things could all describe our young people.
Yep.
And in our ministry, we will come across these things. We will come across these wounds. Many of our young people have grown up in families where there's been a lot of pain. There's alcoholism, there's drug use, there's fatherlessness. That's a big factor in the U.S. for who winds up in prison. Fatherlessness is a huge indicator.
Yep.
Something like 85% of young men in prison from this generation, this younger generation, are fatherless. So it's daunting, it's upsetting when we look at all the wounds of the world and the wounds of the wounded generation. Then we come to, in our churches and in our communities, the wounded individual. What do I mean by that? It could be a lay person in the church. It could be a leader in the church. Could be a patient. in the hospital, a soldier, an inmate in prison, could be a client or a customer that we have, but we come across individuals who are clearly wounded by life. Let's look at some scriptures to describe that. First, let's do Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 to 3. We already looked at verse 1, but let's read verses 1 to 3 of Isaiah 61 because it lists a lot of wounds.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Oh, okay. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me, to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor.
Okay, so what are some of the wounds of individuals that we heard in that passage? What are some of those wounds that we heard in that passage?
He talks right off the bat about poverty.
Okay. Do we have people that we come across in ministry that are poor?
Yes.
That are poor physically?
Yeah.
That are poor in relationships? That
Yeah.
are poor because they don't know Jesus?
Yeah.
They're poor spiritually,
Yeah.
but the poor. Okay? So that's one kind of wound. What else?
It is saying broken-hearted.
Broken-hearted. Do you come across people in your ministry
Oh, yes.
that are broken-hearted?
Yeah.
I do too.
There's a lot of discussion of grieving and mourning.
Yes. Grieving, mourning. What else?
Yeah. Well, he talks about prisoners.
Yes, Isaiah uses the word captive. Are prisoners in prison the only ones who are captive? Do we come across individuals who are captive to things? Captive to another person that's abusive? Captive to alcohol or drugs or some other habit that's destructive? We come across people who are captive to, we've talked about it today, to their clan or their family. They're
Sometimes
caught.
even in marriage, and that it's somebody's married because she has failed to pay back the dowry. She has to be
Yes.
free from that marriage. Now she's living under the suffering because she has no money
To pay
to pay
it
back
back.
for her to be free. She's just living like that.
So she's captive.
She's
It's like
captive.
being a prisoner or a slave
Yep.
Exactly.
in that household,
She
isn't it?
said, I wish I had money to pay or to be free
Yes.
from this suffering.
Wow.
That is
So it's like
wounded.
so it's not like a prison, but it is a prison, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the mourning, Doug, that you mentioned, the mourning and the grief.
Yes.
We meet so many people, don't we, who are grieving. So many people have many losses. Here, there are many deaths. I've read studies that say that a child who grows up in southern Africa now, in Zambia, and other countries near here, by the time they're 13 years, many have lost 5 significant people in their life. Grandparent, parent, sister, brother, aunt. I mean, people that they're close to.
Yes.
They've had so many losses, and there's no time to grieve in between.
Yes.
You know, so it can take years to grieve for one loss, but we put more losses. And things like the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship, loss of a marriage, the loss of a friendship that's
Yes.
meant a lot to you. In the church, we find people that are lonely because of so many losses
Yes.
in
Yes.
their life. People lose self-respect. That's grieving. I'm grieving my self-respect. I'm ashamed. We've been talking about shame. I don't feel good about myself. I wasn't able to keep my house. I lost my house and had to go live with someone else. Well, that's a loss. That's a grief. And it brings shame sometimes if we think we could have prevented it. Okay, that's just one scripture. We have 3 more to do on the wounded individual. Let's look at Matthew chapter 25, verses 35 and 36. Jesus is here describing the different people with different kinds of wounds, that when we visit them or help them, we're actually helping him. Somebody read that for us.
5:36.
Yes.
It reads, For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Thank you.
All right, so what wounds are listed there? What wounds are present?
Yeah. Well, he starts with hunger.
Physically hungry,
Yeah.
and you gave me something to eat. So does being hungry, does that cause a wound that doesn't go away even when you first get food?
Yeah.
Does it cause a wound?
It causes a wound
Yes.
because you can eat. Today I'm hungry, but now I'm eating today. Me as an individual, but my eating does not satisfy even my children.
That's right.
So after I've eaten, I'm full. Out of my children. What am I going to eat tomorrow?
Yes.
What am I going to eat tonight? From now throughout.
Yes.
Yes.
So that hunger kills me now.
And
How
it,
do I go out of this?
yes, how will this ever end? There's then always the fear that you'll be hungry again. Because true hunger is so excruciating. It's to be truly hungry is such suffering that once we're fed, that's okay, but we're always going to be afraid our whole life. What if I go through this again? I don't want to go through this again. And then what about thirsty?
Now wait a minute. I was thinking of those young boys. We were in Mondi Royal Village, and I photographed the 2 nice-looking young boys, and they allowed me to photograph them. Later, when I looked closely at the photographs, I saw sand around their mouths. And I asked Percy about it. He said, "Oh yes, didn't you notice they had been eating sand?" And broke my heart. He said, "It at least fills the stomach, right? There's at least that feeling of fullness, even though there's no nutrition." And then he made the statement, which he'll say a lot: "To a hungry man, even poison is food." And that the hunger that is so deep, and it's not something I've ever experienced. I've only been able to observe it. When I see young boys eating sand, to me, it says something about the desperation.
Yeah, definitely. Just to top on that one, last year we did bury an old woman. In fact, it was a man. It was tough in our community that side. So the children thought they left him. So they went to Namibia just to see how best they can survive. So now that man was just taken care by the neighbors. So, and even also the neighbors, they had no enough food. So this other day, they even forgot upon going to search for more food, they found him that he's dead. Then after reporting that to government, they brought in Mirimu just for processing the funeral. Instead of helping at the time just to save his life. So they brought in Mirimu just to make sure that we bury him nicely. Which is very it's opposite of what he was supposed to be.
Oh my gosh.
It's a
So
common
hunger-
trend, actually. It's a common trend.
We let the one die, and then we bring food for the funeral.
Yes.
Hey.
I think maybe there's a saying where we usually say, you could have fed me while I was alive.
Yeah,
But like in Africa, or in Zambia to be specific,
yeah,
we have a tendency of this family used to live in abject poverty, and they experienced hunger like never before.
Okay.
And their relatives are nowhere to be found. But once there's a funeral, money is released, people are fed
yeah.
as if it's a
So
buffet.
why not before?
And
Yeah, so-
just to add on that one once again, we find that even there's a trend of when somebody is sick, is admitted, very few will turn up for just to see how best to get to find his life out for that maybe particular disease. But when you hear that is dead, you suspend all your work just to go and attend the burial. You have to come in just to make, even when you want just to be registered, that when you have a similar situation, people will come and help you, which is not good. You will see a number of people are full. Number of them they're escorting the lived one. But when he was maybe in need of just Panadol and a few other helps from when he was admitted, they couldn't come in. Only a few. But when they hear that brother or that is dead, so when you will suspend your work, so let's go just to go and bury him. Even upon arriving at the burial there, very few will participate. The rest of us will just be watching. It's just to be there for formality.
I think we are afraid of wounds. I think we are afraid that wounds are contagious. We go to feed a person who's hungry, we're afraid we'll have to keep doing that.
Yeah, that is the
We
point.
don't want to take responsibility once because we're afraid, oh, now I'll have to be kind all the time. How will I do that?
Yeah.
So, wounds, but those wounds go so deep. Being hungry, being thirsty,
Yes.
the not being able to get something to drink. And Jesus, remember when he was carrying the cross and someone brought him a drink.
Yep.
And I always think of that when I hear someone is thirsty. You know, you can die within 3 days without water,
Yep.
without something to drink. So that's a wound, being thirsty. How about being a stranger? What is it like to be a stranger? What are some of the wounds of being a stranger?
I look at this in this way. Being a stranger, meaning this person, if he's a stranger in the society, it will mean 1, no shelter,
No shelter.
2, no food, 3, even the issue of maybe clothes.
Yeah.
There is nothing. So that can make someone to have a wound in the heart.
Yes. Yes. What else about a stranger?
Also strangers, like I've seen it in the time when I was pastor in the refugee camp. the strangers, the refugees had no access to anything except when they request. Sometimes they can be given help,
Okay.
even just a food. You are not, unless you ask. You just give you a small portion. You are a stranger. And even in
Yes.
our community, there are people we know also who are strangers. Like if I get married to a woman whom I've not paid dowry, so I'll be forced to go and stay with her to where she's coming from. She cannot come along with me.
Ah.
Then when I'm there, the family members, they can use me for anything like a slave. A slave to say, they'll be sending you. Go and do that, then you cannot refuse because you're a stranger.
Yes.
Even if somebody will mistreat you, you cannot do anything unless maybe you find a good induna, or maybe the family members who said, we don't want you to mistreat this one. But in most cases, people stay to where the wife comes from. In most cases, they suffer because they're strangers.
And that causes you to be lonely, right?
Definitely.
That's a very lonely feeling. To go somewhere where you don't know anyone.
Yeah.
You might not find shelter, food, clothes, but you also don't have any companionship. If people don't accept you, you know,
Well,
they
if you have
keep
to
you
pay,
out.
you have to pay for the companionship. It's not real companionship,
No.
right? I mean, that's a bizarre. You know, if because I am your slave, you then will speak to me, then we have no relationship.
But Jesus says, you were a stranger, and I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. So the wound is not being welcomed,
Yes.
not having what we need, not being welcomed. A terrible feeling.
Excuse me, there's another scenario which I experienced at where we're coming from. That there was this man who was staying in the next village to the side of the wife. Now, it was the time when there was hunger. So the husband thought of going somewhere to go and do some piecework, to work for some time, to make sure that he keeps the family. So the Induna for that village started going out with that woman, his wife. Later on too, she was pregnant. Then as he came back from there, he was told that the pregnancy you see is the Induna has been going out with your wife. So he could not see anything.
Took advantage.
Then he just says, I'll go ahead with my wife. I'll continue with our marriage. But then when she gave birth to the child, no one had to say, no, who is responsible for the child?
Oh, yeah.
So he took care of the child. Then later on, the same Induna came to demand, say, this is my child.
Ah.
I would love to have my child.
Ah.
So the man remained quiet. Said, no, please give him the child. That was the time when he has taken care of the girl to the puberty, when she was almost 16, 17 years. This is my child. So the man just remained quiet. He took care, he was taking care of that baby from childhood up to the end there. Then he just came, this is my baby.
Wow.
This is my daughter. So he just looked at him. As far as we were hard to say, what is this we are doing? We are taking advantage of his situation. You do all that. You went out with his wife, and even stood there getting the child by force. In that way, it was not good. It was really, I could just be in the shoes of that man. It was painful.
Yes. Very.
But still,
Talk about a wound.
yeah.
Many wounds.
Oh, wow.
You're
My
almost
wife-
surprised that the man didn't just kill the Induna, right? In other words, that's what rises up in you, the injustice of it.
It should have been fixed.
Right,
Yeah,
yes,
it should have been
Exactly.
fixed. Yeah.
And if you were without clothes, you were naked, what would be one of the wounds there? What would you feel?
Without clothes.
Yes.
Shame for sure. Embarrassment.
Humiliation.
Humiliation, yeah.
That's a very powerful wound. Humiliation. No one wants to experience that kind of shame. Humiliation.
Yeah, I don't mean to make light of truly having no clothes, but I don't know if you remember, Abby, many years ago, I was called to do ministry at a certain church, and we were invited to what was described to us as a concert for the youth. So each of us dressed in appropriate clothes for a concert for the youth. I think I had some blue jeans or slacks on, just a normal shirt.
I had blue jeans. I had a tie-dyed T-shirt with bright colors.
Yeah, because when concerts for youth are usually relaxed, right? The van of people came to pick us up, and the door opens for the van, and everybody in the van, the men had coats and ties.
The best clothes.
The women
they
were in
had.
their finest clothes. And we're standing there, and this feeling of, I was so embarrassed because we were new to the community, new to the church, new to the ministry. We said, well, you'll have to wait. We'll go back in the house and change. No. It was very interesting. One of the men, John Wright, said, don't be ridiculous. And he instantly took off his tie, threw it down, and took off his jacket, threw it down, rolled up his sleeves. He said, you're fine. And he came our way. We got to the church. Everybody at this church was dressed in their finest clothes. 3,000 people. That's how big. Everybody's dressed. And we're the only ones dressed like, even the youth were dressed like that. And it was not just a youth concert. It was like the grand piano and the full choir. And then the same man who was so kind, he said, we didn't prepare you for this, right? In other words, we've put you in this place of embarrassment. Yeah. But even still, we're walking among all these people, and women with furs on, and men with their fancy ties, and I'm thinking, Abby, what a bad start. But that's not being without clothes. But it's that same sense that I'm not what I ought to be,
Still
right?
humiliating.
I'm not part of you. I'm separate.
Or maybe if I can chip in.
Yeah.
Yes.
In Africa, Zambia to be specific once again, I've grown up with no clothes in the essence of no proper clothing.
Yes.
Practically putting on clothes that have holes.
Yes.
Yes.
In our language, you say magamba.
Yes.
You say magamba. So you find that you go out, you meet your friends, they have proper clothes.
Yes.
Or you go to school, your uniform is always being repaired. It's
Crisp.
always has yes. So you find that in that context, Jesus said, I was naked, and you clothed me. You find when, like most of the young men and women, the boys who have such clothing, they feel wounded because the other friends will make fun of them. Say, Magamba, he's wearing things that are ripped. And practically they can see your nakedness through those clothes.
It feels like you're naked in a way.
Yes, and you are wounded. The child will have low self-esteem because trying to compare my clothes to your clothes.
Oh, yes.
Where I come from, we have nothing, and the other side, they have everything. So you find wounds are created in terms of low self-esteem and always looking down on yourself. Yes.
And those things carry, don't they, Nathan?
They do.
Through into your adulthood.
Yes.
So maybe you get married and your spouse never experienced being without clothing.
Yes.
But you have, and they can't understand why it's so important to you now that you can to have nice clothes.
Yes.
And you might argue about it or fight about it. But it's because you can't understand the wounds of a person unless you understand what they've been through, how they've been wounded.
Sure. I met a man once who joked about it, but he said, I grew up without shoes,
Yep.
so it's no surprise I have 20 pair. I can afford it. And I don't need them, but it's this feeling that part of me, and he understood, even at 50 years old, he said, I know this is silly.
Yeah.
I don't need all these shoes, but I remember those days
Yep.
when I couldn't go to school because I had no shoes. I was made fun of if I was on the playground with the other children. And he hadn't shaken it yet after all those years.
Yeah. I
Isn't it amazing that Jesus
Yeah.
talks about all these wounds, being hungry, being thirsty,
Yeah,
being
yeah.
a stranger, being naked,
Yeah.
as if he knows what that's like.
Yes.
He must. He says, Scripture says he knows everything we've been through.
Well,
So that means Jesus experienced every part of that. And he cares about these wounds.
yes.
He cares about it because he said, when you do this for someone, you're doing it for me.
Well, think about on the cross.
It's that
They
important.
strip you before they crucify you, right?
Uh,
They take your clothes. And
Oh,
then the humiliation.
total
They
humiliation.
gambled over his clothes, right? So while you're there naked, you're watching them treat your clothes with that disrespect.
and to be crucified on a cross that was only for the lowest criminals.
Yes. But can you imagine hanging there naked in front of all those people?
Ugh.
It's horrible.
And your mother is there.
Yes.
And your closest friends and followers are there.
Yes.
And then Jesus said in that passage, where did you visit me?
Yes.
When I was in prison. So think about it. What are the wounds that a person experiences when they're in prison? What are some of the wounds of being in prison?
Prison.
Just prison.
Wow.
Not being able to go where you want, right? Not being able to get outside when you want to.
Mom, when you are in prison, you sleep like the way you see this. When you are asleep, your friend will come here. Okay? When you want to turn, you say Q. Sleep in the same
The whole
direction.
row has to turn.
So when you want to turn, you have to tell, let's turn. Then all of you.
So you lose being an individual, right?
Look at how much you are going to have of lies. Lies.
Yes.
Lies.
Yes.
Yes.
You are not bathing like the way I've been taking. You don't even access toothpaste.
Yes.
Not even
You feel like an animal, right?
Yes.
If you can't
Yes.
take a shower
Your humanity's
when
taken
you want to. You can't wash. You can't access soap and water.
you make any mistake, maybe even to talk to anyone of your victims without the permission of the warder, the prison warder.
Right.
You'll be beaten like anything else you have done. Yes, you'll be beaten.
No freedom. Total
Plus-
control.
w-
Someone else is controlling you.
Well, and even within the prison population, right? We know power groups, sexual abuse occurs,
Exactly.
slaves really,
Exactly.
right? This group enslaves that group. All these things happen,
Do you think there's great fear in most people
I would think.
There is.
when they're in prison? I think there's so much fear. What if I never get out?
Yes.
And even those who are there are those who have stars, who have killed some people, then they've been sentenced to death. So even if you become stubborn, even if he kills you, to him it's nothing.
Right, because he's going to die anyway.
So much
the
fear
next-
of the people around you.
the
Who do you trust?
The environment, you don't have any freedom to worship.
No.
Maybe only this modern world, this time of the year.
Wow.
Not those days.
But not.
Every day you are given if it's cold like this, you have to put the blanket you're using tries to be full of lies.
Yes.
Big ones whereby when the whole night when it's passing here, it's like so you just
You have a rash.
sometimes you even
The lice dig in.
Yes. And you can get a rash.
and it's not one day's age, but it's throughout every night when it comes to this time, and you eat once in a day. You eat once. A lot of things happen within the prison.
And
yes.
we've heard that here,
Yeah.
if your family doesn't provide food, sometimes you don't eat.
In most cases, they die from there. They die from there. Just take you, and even when the way you are is buried, it's a lot of you see. You are just picked like a dog.
So the wounds, and Jesus said, "You visited me." I think being in prison is such a lonely feeling. The only people that you're with, it's not their choice to be there. Either it's their job because they're a guard, in which case they probably beat everybody regularly for one excuse or another, or they're other prisoners.
Huh.
They didn't choose to be with you. So there's that feeling of I have no control. I have no friends, really. There's only people here who have to be here.
Now
So
you
lots of wounds.
can imagine that some of the people
Uh.
who are in custody, it's not that guilt necessarily, but just for lack of expression,
Yes.
just for lack of vocabulary to say what's supposed to be on the ground.
Right.
Somebody's very innocent, but you are being jailed.
Yes.
You are there, your conscience says, I'm not guilty of anything. But it's because I didn't know the vocabulary of these magistrates and the staff, then you're in prison.
Yes. And many people don't get a lawyer,
Can't
don't
afford
get,
it. A good lawyer.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Or the state assigns somebody who has way too many cases. And even if they want to be good and keep up with defending rights, they don't have time to do all the people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wounds associated with that. Okay, let's read Galatians 5, Paul's letter to the Galatians 5. Are you feeling a little burdened now?
It is. I'm
With the
beginning to feel
wounds-
heavy with these wounds.
The wounds of individuals. Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 to 21.
The acts of the flesh are obvious, meaning the sinful nature. Sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Okay. So what are some of the wounds listed
Sheesh.
there?
Wow.
There's a few, aren't there?
Wow.
What are some of the wounds?
In immorality, it goes on the two ways. Why I say so is because if it is a couple and then the wife is caught in adultery, already that will reflect what? Shame, disgrace, everything.
Whole
And then to
family.
the man, he will even die of depression.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Also the family will be disturbed. They'll
Oh,
feel that,
So much pain.
yes, that pain will be there in the family.
Oh, yes.
And if not handled carefully, the two of them, if they don't handle that issue carefully, there will be quarrels all the time.
Yes.
Finally, the other one might even reach an extent of death,
Yes.
committing suicide,
Yes.
such things.
From the depression,
Yes.
from the rejection.
Yes.
Rejection is such a painful wound
Yes.
for us.
Yes.
That when there's that unfaithfulness in a relationship, in a marriage, oh, that hurts everyone so much. I
Well-
think Satan loves that. I think Satan, it says he wanders around like a roaring lion seeking our destruction. I think when there is so much pain in a
Yeah.
family like that, and the depression and the despair, I think he loves that when he creates that in a family. Yes, that's a definite wound. It causes all kinds of wounds. And a person who has been caught in adultery, has committed adultery, say they then come to Christ, that takes a long time to be forgiven. It's such a betrayal that even though they didn't know Christ and now they're a new creature, they're going to have to work out
Yeah,
those
still
wounds,
remains
right,
in the
in
heart,
them and
yes.
in the other person. Okay, and
Okay.
you mentioned depression. Depression is like an epidemic. It's an epidemic in the U.S. I don't know as much about it here, but I know in the U.S. that many doctors are giving people drugs, and I'm talking just a general doctor, not a psychiatrist. They give out drugs as if they were candy to solve depression. And they actually wind up making people worse because they don't get at the source. What is causing the depression? Why is this person not coping with life? What is the grief? What do they need to work through? And if they don't go to counseling and get help and get prayer, then they just keep taking these pills. They take more and more. They take different kinds. They do different things to their brain, and they wind up worse off because they're not, I'm not saying that there aren't times that for periods of time people need to be on a medication for mental illness or depression or whatever the problem is, but there should be counseling with that.
Yeah.
There should be someone walking alongside the person. The drug will not solve whatever is causing the depression. So depression is a very deep wound. Sometimes people will say, just snap out of it. Just choose, there have been books written, choose to be happy. Choose joy. Put a smile on your face. Well, you can't do that. Depression is a sickness. It's an illness that goes so deep in the wounding that you can't get out yourself. You need help from other people. Scripture talks about this, that we're better off walking with someone. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. We need a companion. When I fall down, you'll help me up. When you fall down, I'll help you up.
Exactly.
The idea is we're all going to fall down. We're all going to feel bad at times, but we need others to help us. That's in our weakness, but we don't want to be left alone. Okay, what's another thing in that Galatians passage?
Well.
There's so much, but think about it from the woundedness side. What else causes wounds?
Well, I'm just going to pick on witchcraft.
Okay.
Because
Understanding is just
witchcraft,
protect you from the sun.
Oh, you're so nice. I'm okay. I have stuff on.
witchcraft offers healing, but actually wounds you, right? In other words, it offers power, but in order to get it, you have to allow yourself to be wounded by evil spirits. It's like a false trade, right?
Yes.
It's like you're saying, oh, I'd like food, and they say, well, we'll give you food, but we'll have to cut off your leg to get the food, right?
We'll give you food, but it will poison you.
Exactly. So so I look at that and I think there's a lot of witchcraft in every culture. The
Yes.
false trades. Well, if I do that, I can get this, and looking for power or control, some way to manage my life, and we give up more than we gain.
You're right.
We give up more than we gain.
What about the wounds of idolatry?
Oh yeah.
What kinds of idolatry cause wounds?
I do.
How about the idolatry of material gain? How can that cause a wound?
Well,
See, there I look at the losses of financially. So after spending that money, then you sit down. Oh gosh, all my money is gone.
Yes.
Things.
yeah.
And those things you bought, they don't help you, do they? You bought the TV, you bought the car, you got a better house. Now are you happy?
Because the thing, the driving force inside, if it's not dealt with, that's not saying that having a TV is bad. It's
No.
saying the drive that will solve my problem
Yes.
is idolatry. That's what I need. I don't need God. I need that.
Yes.
I think you can have idolatry of relationships. I think sometimes
Oh,
people
yes.
Also, yeah.
people
Oh,
are
yes.
almost idolizing that spouse or idolizing that person, even a pastor, right, or something.
Yes.
So you end up attached too closely to them, but not close to the Lord, and they end up controlling you, or you're allowing yourself to be controlled, whatever the case may be.
Finally, the past then becomes a wound spiritually.
Yes.
Yes, it
Right.
does.
Yes.
It does.
Because you're in essence entrusting to something to someone that only God should be entrusted with. Yeah, it's a good
And
insight.
eventually, that pastor or leader will let you down because they're human.
That's right.
At some point, they're going to cease to be your idol,
Yeah.
and you'll
yeah.
have that wound of not depending on Jesus enough. What about witchcraft? What kinds of wounds have you seen through your ministry that are caused by witchcraft in individuals?
Witchcraft is disastrous. It's bad. Causes a lot of things. Like I've been saying in my case, the witchcraft operation has swept out my family members. So my mom lives in depression. She's wounded.
Yes.
From the loss of those family members?
Those family members.
So
nine
many.
of them.
9. Aye.
You lost
I
9
have-
family members in
Yes.
just a few years.
Except me, the last one.
And some were murdered, I remember.
Did you say? They died of illness or this?
It's, you know, I don't know what type of witchcraft you experience that time. There is what we call kailose. Kailose is made, it's a magic gun,
Magic gun.
which when I do all the spells and the stuff, then I point it at you. Then I shoot, you die immediately, without even being admitted.
Interesting.
Any sign of any sickness.
You're talking about real witchcraft.
Yes.
Real, like
So we were talking to you a minute
Look at
ago.
Caligula, like, of course that's what
a
we're talking about.
powerful
Yes.
witch.
Just wanted to add that it's made of a dry bone of a human being, and then a bit of some things wrapped around it. So
Yes.
as
And-
they do the enchantment upon that thing, let this person not to live. By sunset, this man has to die.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then they shoot it. And there is a certain man nearby a village in Nangweshi there. Him, they say, when he shoots,
Yeah.
he has even to poof. And
You
that
even
person
can-
will suffer from diarrhea, short diarrhea, and then he dies.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So it's terrible. And then to the relatives, to now bring the wound.
Somebody,
Yes.
like the way Pace has
Terrible
just
wound.
gone to rest.
Yes.
Then when upon arriving there, I find that Pace is gone.
Huh.
Yes,
Well, I pray that we don't find Percy gone when we say.
But the whole community then is wounded by
So
fear.
wounded by him.
Even if they didn't even know the person, the fear that would come
Yeah.
that this could happen to me. It's worse than the fear of COVID.
Exactly.
It's fear of death.
And such people, if sometimes they've got even fun, stupid things, that if I'm at loggerhead with Nathan, then I come to the same person and say, I think Nathan I'm not in good books with Nathan. Kindly clear him for me. Then he'll come at night when I'll just give him a tin of maize. I'm giving you this tin of maize, then can you get rid of Nathan? Then he comes to Nathan at night, hammers Nathan, is gone.
Yes.
So I
Also-
think
So in every case, the witch doctor wins and everyone else loses. Right?
But sometimes even them, the witchcraft, they also suffer some consequences.
Of
Yes, they
Because
must.
after clearing that person, the relatives will not just let it go like that.
Right.
Finally, you find that person struggling in his life, and it will affect his life. It will give him that feeling in the heart that I'm no longer at peace with these people.
Yes.
Finally, others die, others they go mad.
Yes.
So,
And think about the woundedness.
Huh.
If you are a witch doctor and Satan has captured you in this power struggle and you do those things, then at some point you're going to feel the guilt and the shame, even if you cover it.
Even if it's when you die.
You're a human being. People will stay away from you, right? People will be afraid of you, or people will criticize you or be angry with you. So being a witch doctor is an evil thing, but it's also, I think, a lonely thing.
Yeah, it is.
You can't have a lot of friends when you're a witch doctor. Who would you trust? You know you don't trust yourself. Who else would you trust?
Yes.
You are right. Right now, there's a certain man who is just fidgeting around. He's got his children that are right in Livingstone, maybe about 4 of them. They have run away from him
Yes.
because of the same operation. So even the wife has also decided to live with him. Say, no, it's like you are eliminating a lot of people. So
Yes.
he's just fidgeting around.
Yes.
No one's taking care of him.
Yep. Yep.
And also, witchcraft brings about the wounds of enmity between people. For instance, there's some, you might find that in the other village there's a witch, and people are dying on the other side in another village. Especially back in those days, witchcraft was one of the weapons that different clans, different tribes used to fight
Yes.
one another.
Yeah.
So you find some to this very day, there's still enmity. They are still wounded because of what that witch
Yes.
did to
Yes.
this family, to this
And
clan.
just like in every culture,
Yes.
even when people become Christians and they may be a leader in the church, they may still go back sometimes to the witch doctor if, say, their wife was dying
They
of
become
something and
desperate.
the doctors and the prayers weren't helping. People out of desperation will go back,
Yes.
even though they're believers.
Which means that the fear is still dominating them.
It's terrible because, like in my case, the time when these guys were doing this, I had a gun. They said, I had that AK-47,
Oh yeah.
and I had about 40 bullets. Then this man, when he was caught by another witch doctor, because there's witch doctor and there are those witch diviners.
Okay.
So he came to expose him, to say, you are the actual person who killed the Martinez family, you. So he admitted publicly to say, yes,
I'm the one.
I'm the one. What happened? Can you just open it for us? These 4, I was using them for hunting animals. Whenever I go in for hunting, I was using them to bring animals near. Then I'm able to shoot. It was in an arena of this kind. So after hearing that, my mom was just next to me like this. She just got a bottle straight on the forehead of the witchcraft.
Oh my God.
He just removed it, started now bleeding. Then the actual diviner, he got the group, can you bring this bagger? So they had to organize some oil and charcoal, crushing them, then that to remove his hair, using a bottle, then removing everything, then the whole thing was black. So me, I told Mom, don't fight. I stopped my mom, but she was weeping. But myself, by then, I was not, it was an internal
Battle.
I went back home, looking at all the houses of my brothers who have gone. Then, military. I just then to cook So I think the best, I need to retaliate. So I looked at I counted how many blades I have. Then I must get rid, every blade should be empty for family member for that particular man. And other connected guys. And no one knew about that one. It was my inner thing.
Yes.
Then not until the Lord spoke to me at night to say, what will it pay you? No, my mom never knew about, my dad never knew about that plan. What will it pay you to eliminate all of this? Because my plan was to get at least 39 souls, the last swim. To make sure that even the government will come and say, this is very bad. It's not good to practice witchcraft. So, but the Lord spoke to me at night. What I did the following days to get the same gun with the bullets, I handed over to the government, to the police to say,
Take
as
these
long
from
as
me.
as long as I'll be in this pain, I may be tempted.
So one of the wounds is that when we're hurt, we begin to hate.
Exactly.
We can get bitter.
Yep.
That's a wound that's very hard to get over.
That could be a prison too.
That
hatred.
can be a prison, that we have so much hatred and bitterness towards someone, we resent them, so that we then are, as you said, in a prison. We're in that state where we're tempted to commit sin, to murder even.
Yes.
And remember, Jesus said that it isn't just the act of murder, it's what we have in our hearts. That creates a wound, that bitterness, that hatred. We have to get rid of that by God's grace. So that's a wound. We have individuals, right, that come to us that have resentment, that have bitterness in their hearts. Maybe they're bitter towards someone who really hurt them. Maybe they were abused, or they were damaged, or their family member was killed. They have real reason to be resentful, but the resentment will hurt them. That's a wound. Until Jesus heals that, they will live with that continually. That wound will just get more and more infected. So that part of our job in ministry and leadership is helping to open the wounds, which is very difficult. We need so much wisdom, so much help from the Holy Spirit to carefully help someone realize Jesus was with you when that wrong was done to you. You may be asking God, why didn't you protect me? We may not know that till heaven. What was the reason that God didn't stop that? But God was with us. He loves us. He can take even a bad experience, even suffering, and turn it to good. That's one of the messages of the cross, is that suffering is not meaningless. God can take it and change it. God changed you. He took away that infection and He healed your wound. But it takes time, right? It's not something that happens instantly. We don't like to open these wounds because we're afraid they'll never heal. But the truth is, God does bring healing, and He brings it to individuals. This last part of this Galatians passage about discord and rage and fightings and divisions and everything, it's almost overwhelming. But how many times...
Describes a couple of church meetings I've been in.
Yes, it can happen in the church, divisions and rage. It happens in families, right? We have people come to us in ministry who are very wounded by the arguments, the fighting in their families. And maybe when they were little children, they may not even remember it until they've met Christ and the Lord is helping them have the courage to look back at their life and see what wounds they have, and we can help them walk through that. Okay, the last passage, you'll be happy to know, on the wounded individual that we're going to look at today is James chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. Does someone have that? James chapter 1, verses 14 and 15.
But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death.
Okay. So what are the wounds being described there?
Well, our own evil desires are one, right? That's
Okay.
something in us that desires evil.
Let's say it's a sin of, we have something against someone and we want to hurt them.
Okay.
That's going to be the sin. The first evil desire and the first wound in us is that desire to harm.
Right.
We want to retaliate. You know, forgiveness is not having a good feeling about someone. Forgiveness is deciding not to take revenge. I'm not going to take bad action against you to get back at you for what you've done to me. When we say, I forgive you, it does not mean I feel great about you, or I trust you, or even we're reconciled. That comes after forgiveness. But when I in myself decide to forgive someone with God's help and grace, I'm saying I'm not going to retaliate. But an evil desire...
By that definition, your decision to give up the weapon was actually an act of forgiveness.
Yes, it was. Yes,
the
it
choice
was.
not to seek vengeance. But I bet inside you still felt you said, I know in the future I'm not done with this, so you better take the weapon or I'm going to use it. It's interesting.
Yep. So not taking vengeance. But if our evil desire would then be, I've been wounded, now I'm going to cause a deeper wound in myself by having an evil desire to get back at you. I'm going to hurt you more than you hurt me. So then it gives birth to what? Sin. Sin is an act that separates us from God that often harms someone else. So I'm going to do the sin, and then what is the result of sin ultimately without Christ? Death. Death. It doesn't necessarily mean that we kill someone. What if we just kill their reputation? What if I gossip about them because I heard they gossiped about me? So now I'm going to spread a nastier rumor about them, and I'll ruin their reputation. I'll bring shame on them and their family.
Killing their reputation.
Killing them.
And it brings death to the relationship, right? There's no...
Yes.
The retaliation then makes it impossible for that relationship. It just kills it.
Yep. So those are wounds. Those are just some of the wounds of individuals.
I'm very depressed.
Many of them are wounds we've suffered, but they're very much, we see all these things, don't we, in ministry, in the church, in our communities, even in our families. Yeah. So as we're talking about addressing the categories of the wounded, we're going to leave the category of the wounded pastor or the wounded leader. We're going to leave that for tomorrow. But I do want to go to see these wounds affect ministry and drive ministry, shaping our plans, programs, teaching, and preaching. We're not going to split into groups. If we had a bigger class, we split into 4 groups and discuss how we can address these wounds. In other words, for the wounded world, these major things that we see all across the world, no peace, no justice, war, divisions, hostility, people with foolish hearts that are darkened, people without hope, without God.
Okay.
How would we address that in ministry? How do we address the wounds of the world? As you look at the church, you look at your own call, your ministry, how can you, as God's hands and feet, address that group?
You're asking us to discuss this?
Yeah.
Or you're just raising the rhetorical question?
No, I'm saying let's come up with some plans, or talk theoretically about how churches could have an impact on those wounds.